in under 20 minutes because that is when my office hours start. So this is episode 1 of 9.4, Economics in a Global Age. So here's what the College Board has to say. In a trend accelerated by the end of the Cold War, many governments encouraged free market economic policies and promoted economic liberalization in the late 20th century. We are going to talk about what these things mean. Don't worry. So, the practice of economic liberalization is often referred to as neoliberalism. That is a controversial term. It's the term I'm most familiar with, so that's why I'm going to use it, and I'm going to explain it. But I do want you to be aware that it does kind of come with some baggage. So, they originally called themselves neoliberals, but throughout the course of the 80s and the 90s, it kind of picks up this like critique vibe that like when you call these policies neoliberal, you're critiquing them. That is not in fact what I'm doing, but that's what they called themselves. So like in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s when these ideas were being developed, they called themselves neoliberals and called this idea neoliberal. So that's why I'm going to call it that. So let's talk about neoliberalism. So neoliberalism is essentially a it really starts mid-century, mid-20th century. And it is a shift, a new development in capitalist economic theory. For the most part, it is a reaction to the large increase in government intervention in the economy after the Great Depression and World War II. And it is really pioneered by two men. One is Austrian, he's over here. This is Hayek. And the other is American, and he is here, and this is Friedman. And they are really the two pioneers of neoliberal theory. And basically, what it is it builds on this idea of the classical liberal free market economics of like Adam Smith from the 18th century in defense of individual liberty to protect property, the freedom of the market, and to look at the world in daily life through the eyes of the market. Like when you say, "Oh, I'm in the market for a coffee," or in the market for a new car, right? That you're like in the market to date someone. All of this is kind of the internalization of this idea of the market. So here, from the Handbook of Neoliberalism, this is what they have to say. At a base level, we can say that when we make reference to neoliberalism, we are generally referring to the new political, economic, and social arrangements within society that emphasize market relations, retasking the role of the state and individual responsibility. Okay. Something else that I want to talk about is this idea, kind of the key factors of neoliberalism is privatization. Privatization. Oh, no, I don't want you yet. Oh, no, I messed up. Privatization and deregulation. So these two kind of go hand in hand. They are the role that the government can take. This idea that the government should take a much, much smaller role in the economy. So privatization would be the government doing things like, say, the government controlled, like it does in Seminole County, for example, controls the water, right? And you pay your water bill to Seminole County. Privatization would be allowing for a corporation to privatize that industry. So now, instead of being run by the government, that a company would run the water. The theory behind this would be that that would mean that it's going to be a more efficient water market and that people will hopefully get better water. We don't do that with water for the most part because water is one of those things that like people need. So it gets awkward when you have companies kind of charging more for it. So in something that's a natural monopoly like that, we often, like a natural resource, we often don't see private companies own it. But during this like spirit in the 70s and the 80s, that could be an industry that we would see privatization. Deregulate, let me try again. Deregulation would be the government taking regulations that it has on things like airlines, banking, car manufacturing, taking all the regulations and rolling them back. So that way, the theory goes that those regulations cost companies a lot of money because they're always trying to keep up with what the government is telling them they have to do. So deregulation would save these companies money, and the natural competition of the market would mean that they'll like kind of regulate themselves, so to speak. Another part of it is going to be globalization, the ability of a company to, well, basically, we drop trade barriers because free trade is going to be a huge thing for neoliberalism. So free trade is super important and kind of goes hand in hand with globalization. So like dropping trade barriers, so dropping tariffs, dropping duties, dropping regulations, right? We're deregulating, dropping regulations in trade between countries, kind of spurring more and more trade. Another one is austerity. So that's going to be decreasing government spending. So that's going to be on any kind of government program. That could be on pensions for post office workers, a pension's like a retirement fund. Um, for post office workers, it could be education, it could be welfare, it could be environmental cleanup, it could be, the IRS or other government agencies kind of cutting their budgets and cutting their staffs in order to kind of save the government money. The two biggest people who are kind of associated with the neoliberal agenda, with this economic liberalization at the end of the 70s and into the 80s, are British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. She was often called the Iron Lady. She's Prime Minister from 79 to 90. And President Ronald Reagan. Reagan is president from 81 to 89. So they definitely embrace these policies in order to kind of jumpstart the economy because the late 70s we're experiencing this period of stagflation, which is like a really ugly word. And what that means is that the economy is stagnant, like as in it's not growing, and there is inflation. So prices are going up, but the economy is remaining stagnant. So, like, this is the gap between what people have in terms of money, right, and the prices for things. um, and it's not good. Also, at the end of the 70s, we're experiencing deindustrialization, so a lot of the kind of stable jobs that people had in factories are moving because of globalization. So the United States economy hasn't successfully shifted from an industrial economy to a service economy or even a post-service information economy, which is what it is now. So that in that rift, there's this ugly stagflation. And these two individuals implement these policies of deregulation and economic liberalization in order to try and jumpstart the economy. Um, Another person who does this that kind of helps to give neoliberalism a bad name is Augusto Pinochet, who's the military dictator of Chile. So, yeah. So, like I was saying, another big part of the economic liberalization at the end of the 20th century is the kind of fast and uncontrolled, almost growth of globalization. This is where a lot of the anti-globalization reactions come from, is this ability for corporations to shift jobs overseas, which is facilitated by the dropping of barriers. Some people would even say that it leads to the kind of prioritizing of corporations over countries, which is possible. And also kind of because the drive towards innovation is kind of always there in a corporation. corporations can move faster than countries in this way. They don't have to answer to voters, for example. Um, Neoliberalism and economic liberalization basically last from the 80s. Wow, dude. Basically lasts from the 80s until the financial collapse of '07, '08 to the Great Recession. And that's because the Great Recession is essentially caused by the deregulation of the banking market, of banking and mortgages. And so they kind of rein in some of that growth and implement new regulations on some of these industries. So that's that.